Hello everybody and welcome to The Discerning Otaku. I'm back once again with another, we'll see how short this one is. This one will probably make some people mad because I'm going to call it In Defense of Sword Art Online. Now everybody knows what Sword Art Online is. It's one of the most popular isekai uh, I don't want to say forerunners, but one of the more popular versions of the genre out there right now, although I would argue that it's not a true isekai. Isekai obviously stands for in another world, and whereas Sword Art Online does technically take place in another world, it also technically doesn't. It is more akin to being a VR world, which loosely you could say it's in another world, but in the same way as a lot of other VR shows, I technically wouldn't classify it as an isekai, as they are technically still in the real world, just trapped in a game. So whereas most people are going to classify this one as isekai, I'm going to kind of not really lean that way. Now, a lot of people have said that the first season is a solid season. You know, the main premise is the characters all get trapped in a VR MMO, and due to the creator being a complete sociopath, if they die in said game, they die in real life, and there is no way for them to log out, and if you try to forcibly take off their VR helmets, your head explodes. Now, I do agree with that. I love the first season. The first season is very, well, the first section of the first season I find to be very good. I enjoy the Aincrad arc, and I do think that it does a lot of things I enjoy. Myself, whenever I play games, I do typically tend to play a solo player. It's not that I'm antisocial, it's just that I don't always regularly play games within a strict schedule. So for me to play something with a party, so on and so forth, can be rather difficult. And with most of my friends, we don't really always play the same games, and we don't always play the same systems. Not everything's cross-plat. So when it comes to Kirito and all of that, I can honestly see the solo play. As far as him playing the martyr, I do think that is a tired trope, and one that he is kind of the penultimate annoyance. So I will agree with that fact. However, I do feel that within most of the other shows and stories within this genre, he does tend to be a good representation of all of these tropes. I think he does a good enough job at being the character that some people are obviously going to hate and some people are obviously going to enjoy. I don't foresee anything particularly wrong with that. So as far as him being a character, I don't really have too many issues. Now, when a lot of other shows within this genre tend to fall within the harem trope, he does tend to avoid it, whereas there are other women in the show that are obsessed with him. He does stick with one woman through the show, which would be Asuna. There are other girls, like I said, that has interest in him, but he doesn't pursue any of those, so it does not fall into the harem trope like a lot of the other ones do. When we're talking about isekai, you have How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, and other ones like that that do inch more towards harem. Even ones like In Another World with My Smartphone do tend to fall more towards the harem aspect, whereas Sword Art has actually done a fairly good job of avoiding that. So whereas a lot of people will always complain about harem, this is a complaint that within this show technically you cannot have, because it does tend to avoid it. Now, while I said I do enjoy the Aincrad arc, after that finishes, then we get the Elfheim arc, and I did not really enjoy this arc. Now, this seems to be a common complaint amongst people. They said it gets kind of creepy due to a specific scene featuring Asuna. I agree and disagree on this. I do feel that the scene wasn't particularly needed, but at the same way, it does give you a reason to dislike the opposite character. Now, in the same way as this style of scene has become more and more prevalent in current years, such as the very first episode of Goblin Slayer, but you didn't hear too many people complaining about Goblin Slayer with that. Well, you do have some people complaining, but a lot of people just went, okay, it's in the story, move on from there. Now, like I said, I do agree that the scene was not definitely needed, but I did not want to demonize an entire show because of one solitary scene that just made people uncomfortable. There are a lot of things in anime that make people uncomfortable. Hell, there are a lot of things in the world that make people uncomfortable. If you're going to demonize an entire show for one scene, I do feel sorry for you. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand, but for me, it becomes kind of difficult just to demonize it for that one individual scene. And because I'm not monetized or anything along those lines, but there's a dream, I'm not really going to delve into that, but most people will know what I'm talking about. Now, after that, we come into the third story arc, which is the Gun Gale Online story arc. Now, I personally very, very much like the Gun Gale story arc. I like that it took the show away from your typical fantasy setting and set it in a more dystopian gun-based setting, as the name implies. Basically, they went into a different game, which is more of a third-person shooter MMO, and from there played that. It made the setting a little bit more gritty. You do still have all of the same characters, and then you also add in my personal favorite character, Sinon. She's my favorite character in pretty much any show. Absolutely adore her. Which is going to be your shy in real life badass sniper online. And so we see Kirito getting new friends, but still having a hard time breaking the fantasy aesthetic, whereas he gets a photon sword and plays the game that way. And he's also skinned as a woman in this one because of a mistake with his character creation. No problems with that. I've felt no issues with that whatsoever. Like I said, I really enjoyed the setting of that arc. I felt that the story itself is very interesting. I felt that there have been definite positives in every arc of the show up to this point, and even moving on, I felt that there were things that did a good enough job at keeping my attention and deepening the story, whether it be adding in additional characters or looking into different AI personalities within each individual game that they moved around, such as when Asuna and Kirito get Yui, their child. I felt she was an interesting character and a very interesting thought on AI and AI sentience. So up to that point, I had no issues. Now, after that, it starts to get a little strange for me. It delves into more. Let me see here. Let me pull this up. At this point, we kind of split off. Sword art becomes kind of a much more different thing, and then we start breaking into our different movies and different split shows and things like that. So we had the Elysiization will come after all of those. That is where I start to get a little bit concerned. Now, a lot of people have said they really like Elysiization as the concept, which actually is probably the closest to Isekai you're going to get. I personally was not a humongous fan of it. But after basically Sword Art Online 1 and 2, which is going to cover the Aincrad arc, the Elfheim arc, and the Gun Gale arc, that is when we get into the movie Ordinal Scale. So the timeline goes into ordinal scale, which is a very, very well done movie, I must say. The production quality on it is fantastic. I absolutely, truly, truly enjoyed it. I think there were a lot of interesting things done in this movie. I enjoyed the difference, the fact that they went AR instead of VR. So we do have a little bit of weirdness there to where they're not in a different world whatsoever. They're in the real world with AR glasses playing an AR video game, which is a little bit different because at this point we have real life athletic ability with a lot of different characters. And the movie itself, you have to suspend some disbelief on seeing a lot of these video game people who, play full dive VR and then they go, I can play AR, I'm going to be in good shape. Suspension of disbelief. But as far as the movie goes, I've watched it many, many times and I actually do quite enjoy it. And then from there, that movie actually sets up Elysiization. So the ending antagonist, what happens at the very end of Ordinal Scale, rolls right into Elysiization, where Kirito is once again put inside a VR game, but he does not seem to be fully aware of what happened to him, so he's just living in this other game, which is why I said this one feels the most like an isekai, because he does seem to kind of be completely out of it at this point. Now, Elysiization, good fight scenes, good animation. We don't see Kirito for as much of it once we get further into it. War of the Underworld, I believe he's barely in any of it, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I watched it because I didn't really like it. For me personally, I felt it was kind of boring, but I can understand why a lot of people did like it, because it didn't just follow the same methods that the first technically two seasons followed, the first 3 or 4 arcs followed, which kind of relied heavily on a lot of VR MMO tropes within that, where Elysiization kind of changed it up a little bit. But I mean, at the end of it, we still get the Kirito power fantasy at the very end of War of the Underworld. So anybody who's really cheering on his character overall still gets what they want. I personally didn't really care. He is fine as a character, but more or less I just like the setting and the environment a lot of this, and I enjoyed the writing for a good chunk of it. But Elysiization, fine. At this point, we branch off, and they've released now 2 secondary movies from Sword Art called Sword Art Online Progressive, Aria of a Starless Night, and Scherzo of Deep Night, which are basically retellings of the original stories, but from Asuna's point of view. I've watched them. They're very interesting. They're very well done. But once again, it is more of the same thing, just from her point of view instead of Kirito's point of view. So, once again, well enough done movies. The series popularity obviously elicited enough interest for those to get made. And also from there, we also had a spin-off series called Sword Art Online Alternative Gun Gale Online, which I really, really like. I actually held off a long time on watching this one, just because I didn't know if I was going to like it or not. But I truly did. The story of Gun Gale Alternative Online is basically we're back in the Gun Gale universe, which, like I mentioned earlier, I really did enjoy. But this time we are following Karen, a university student who has a complex about the fact that she's tall. So in the actual game Gun Gale Online, she actually plays a very, very short character who runs around in pink armor and had little bunny ears with just the craziest little submachine gun possible, and just wrecks people. And they actually did just announce season 2 of that not that long ago, so I'm definitely looking forward to that one. Now, I will say I have not read the light novel Sword Art Online is based off of, I will say. Sorry, I have not read that. I have also not read the manga. I do have the manga. It is on my list, but my backlog of manga is currently around 700 or 800 different volumes I need to get through. And I can only read so fast. I've got a lot of other stuff to do. But I don't think the show deserves as much hatred as it gets. Is it perfect? No, no. There are very few perfect shows. Is it entertaining? Definitely. It has decent enough writing, character designs are fine. It is a little bit tropey, but you also have to remember it has been around for a while. A lot of the tropes that people are complaining about, it started. It's not the originator of any of them. There are many that predate it. I mean, Mushoku Tensei did a lot of the isekai stuff far before Sword Art did. It was not probably the first VR MMO, but it did kind of set the stage for a lot of shows afterwards. I mean, you probably wouldn't have Overlord, you probably wouldn't have Goodnight World. There's a lot of these shows that really relied heavily on a lot of the things that Sword Art did. So you made Sword Art walk so these other shows could run. Now, I don't think it needs to be worshipped by any stretch, but I also don't think it needs to be hated by any stretch of the imagination. It is a serviceable show. If it's not within your genre liking, that's perfectly fine. If you've given it a chance and you want to step back and go, this isn't for me, I have no qualms with it. I am not a person that says you need to watch everything within this before you can judge it. No. You should not hate watch something. You should not waste your valuable time on trying to watch everything. A lot of people and myself, if you watch the first 3 episodes, if it doesn't grab you, it probably won't. And that's okay. There's plenty of anime out there, plenty of media out there. If something doesn't grab you, not a problem. But I do think that a lot of the people that are just hating on it to hate on it are just doing it because it's very popular to do. This show is a lot of people's starter anime because it's pretty easy to get into. It's not particularly deep. For me, I don't want to say guilty pleasure because I have far weirder shows I'll watch for that. But for me, it is an enjoyable show that I watched at a time in my life where I might have been going through some stuff and it was a comfort show for me. So I can sit down and remember exactly where I was at the first time I saw Kirito go down and take out the first level boss, or when Sinon was introduced and me just going, who is this introverted character that I can relate to on a lot of different levels? So as far as a lot of these things go, like I said, this episode was just for me to say in defense of Sword Art Online. It's not perfect. It didn't reinvent the wheel. But in all honesty, don't just hate a show just to hate a show. Just because it's popular to dislike something doesn't mean you need to do it. If you truly don't like it, no problem. There's probably a bunch of other shows that you and I will agree on. But if it's something that you've avoided because of people talking crap, give it a try. You might find something that you actually do enjoy. At least the first story arc is quite good. The second one, but with that, I'm going to go ahead and call this video because I'm almost at 20 minutes and I was only going to make like a 10-minute video. But as always, the discerning otaku, and as I always say, if you like what I'm doing, leave me a comment down below, subscribe if you're so inclined, and watch more anime, read more manga. Guys, have a good one.